Good morning to our audience on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you in other time zones. I'm Jeffrey Herbst, president of American Jewish University in Los Angeles, and welcome to another Wizen Center for Open Learning program, The Future of Gaza, Trump's Proposals and Other Plans with the Washington Institute's David Makovsky. But first, welcome to another Wizen Center for Open Learning program. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've had over 200 programs, and I've been gratified that over 200,000 people have registered. Please go to our website, www.aju.edu, to see the many exciting programs we have in the future. Also, we are extremely grateful for the support that you, the audience, have provided over the years. These programs are free, but they are not costless, and your continued support would be greatly appreciated. It's a pleasure now to welcome back David Makovsky. He is the Ziegler Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and director of the Koret Project on Arab-Israeli Relations. I should note, of course, that AJU is also the home of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, and we share that family's name and are reminded again of the tremendous impact their support has had on so many institutions, including both of ours. In 2013-14, David worked in the office of the U.S. Secretary of State, serving as a senior advisor to the Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, and he is a well-known commentator and analyst on Israel-Palestinian relations and on Middle East politics. David, welcome back to our platform.
Delighted to be back with you, Jeffrey. Thank you for having me.
David, let's go right into it. I know the audience is interested. So in setting the stage for discussing President Trump's proposals and others, let me ask you, is the two-state solution dead? Many Israelis certainly believe that it died on October 7th, or perhaps more poignantly, was buried with the Bibas family when they were buried.
Look, there's no doubt that, and again, Jeffrey, thanks again for having me. I'm glad to be back. I think it's certainly on life support. It's not going to happen anytime soon. It's clear. The trauma in Israel is very deep. And I said on the PBS NewsHour, I said, if the Israeli public knew that a Palestinian state was going to look like Costa Rica, most Israelis would line up to make that happen. But if people equate withdrawal with vulnerability and not with enhanced security, then there's not going to be people rushing to sign up. And if people feel they didn't like the book in Gaza, they don't want to see the movie in the West Bank. So, I mean, it's nowhere near happening. I think the best case, frankly, is that it's incremental. I think, Jeffrey, I love sports, so I can't resist sports analogies that we've tried to hit the home run on this issue a few times. Clinton 2000, Condoleezza Rice with Abbas and Olmert during the W. Bush administration. I worked on, as you pointed out, on the Obama team the third time, and we all swung for the fences. I think these were noble efforts, but when you swing for the fences, you could strike out easier. I think we have to get some singles. And I think we have a better shot to do it in a regional context if there's some sort of breakthrough with the Saudis, but it's not enough. It's got to have to be what I would call security benchmarks. There's got to be clear criteria that are met. I was on a panel at the Harvard Business School. We had 800 students at the Klarman Hall. I was on with a woman named Amani Jamal, who was the dean of what used to be known as the Woodrow Wilson School. I think it's called the Princeton Graduate School for International Relations. She's a Palestinian woman, and it was a delight to be on with her. But I mentioned then, Israel made a deal to get out of Gaza with Abbas, and then found that Hamas was able to outmaneuver and outmuscle Abbas. And I don't say on that to pick on the past and live in the past, but because what happened in 2007, we are living that reality today. And once Hamas took over and threw the Fatah people off the rooftops of hospitals, Hamas became in charge. So Israel cannot be in that position that it signs up with one, and then Hamas takes over, and then there's no hope. So I think whatever's going to come after this is going to have to be incremental. Ideally, it should be part of a wider framework with normalization with the Saudis. I don't think that's going to be in 2025. I think the issues of Iran and Gaza are going to be the twin issues that dominate. I thought it was fascinating last night on the news. It hasn't really percolated here yet in the United States, but at the first meeting, Jeffrey, of the new chief of staff, who I should say was a visiting fellow at the Washington Institute, his office was literally 2 doors down or 3 doors down from me. He said 2025 could be a year of war, and with Iran, with Gaza and Iran. So I think that's a signal that there could be some tough days ahead. But I hopefully the region will get to better days, and I hope if there's a wider frame and security is the lens often as well, then I just feel a one state outcome of Israel being a binational state is something that Israelis can't accept. They want it to be a Jewish state, of course, with equal rights for all citizens. But I don't think that is having a binational state is something with very two different narratives of nationalist aspirations is a recipe for success. So yes, no transformative moments right now at all. Trauma is very deep. We could talk about that. But I think we have to be more incremental, and I know people don't like to hear that, but that's how I see it.
I'll be talking with David for about 20 minutes, and then we welcome questions from you, the audience. Please start submitting questions now via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So, David, let's talk about President Trump's proposals that have attracted a lot of attention and maybe changed the trajectory of the debate. Many people believe that the most incisive line about President Trump generally is that he should be taken seriously, but not literally.
Yeah.
So how do you evaluate his
Yeah.
suggestions on Gaza?
No, I think it's a great question, and I tend to be in that view, which is don't take him literally, but take him seriously. Look, yeah, he's someone who is if you look at his book, The Art of the Deal, he always says aim high in negotiations, like have a very maximalist starting position. Could this be more of a ploy than a plan? I think with Trump, what everyone who works with him says is don't come, making demands from Trump without you saying what you're willing to do. So I think he's a bit tired of Arab states just batting the ball or the tennis, with the tennis racket batting the tennis ball in the Israeli court or the American court. And he says, okay, what are you putting on the table? So I see this as a way, and they all want to be in his good graces for now. I think there is a danger, Jeffrey, that if there's too much of a gap between reality and the rhetoric, then there's going to be a discount factor. It was interesting at one point, if you remember, during one of the hostage releases, he said, if they don't all come out by noon, then I think the gates of hell should be open. And yet the Israeli public wanted to see the live hostages. And so they kind of, shunted that aside. But I do think for now, the Arabs want to be in the good graces. What they seems to have put forward was okay, not great, better than normal, but not ideal. So I do think is a way of trying to elicit from them. And Mike Waltz was on Meet the Press and was also on a CBS program and basically said, okay, you don't like what the president says? What are you going to do? Now in Israel, it is being taken more seriously, I think, this idea of voluntary relocation for people who have dual passports. Over 100,000 have left via Egypt transit. But I don't think it's fundamentally shifted the underlying dynamics when you have about 2 million people in Gaza. So we'll need to see, but I tend to think it's more of a way to elicit something from the Arabs and not just do the usual and blame America, blame Israel.
So let's talk about that, about shifting to the Arab side. And the Arab plan recently came out, and the sticking point seems to be who runs Gaza.
Yeah.
The US and Israel have said not Hamas. The Arab plan poses some kind of technocratic future transitioning to the PA. But is there an answer to this problem of, on the one side, Israel and the US saying no Hamas, and on the other side, the fact that
Yeah.
Hamas or the rump of Hamas is still there?
Yeah, no, you put your finger on the exact point, which is there among the Arabs, there's no consensus themselves. I mean, if you look at the UAE, they hate Hamas just as much as the Israelis do. And the Egyptians can't say certain things, but you know, their biggest rivals are the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas is the Gaza chapter. So these are two countries that want nothing to do with Hamas. They wanted to go away, but the problem is the more you try to get a consensus, the more you lose certain elements. So a lot of these regimes, they don't tell their, I was on the BBC and I said, like, you know, they don't tell the public the truth. I mean, they would rather frame everything as, well, we don't want to help Israel export the Palestinian problem. But then when you talk to Arab officials quietly, Jeffrey, they say, you know, a lot of these people are Muslim Brotherhood people with radical views. Why would we want to import these people? But that they don't say on television. So there's a gap between what they say privately and what they say publicly. But you know, now the question is, according to the Arabs, that Hamas has no problem, that there should be, quote, technocrats that are in charge. But, you know, we have something called the Hezbollah model, where in the Mideast, if you fire the shots, you call the shots. So Hezbollah doesn't have to be the prime minister of Lebanon, but because their arsenal was so formidable, they could force the hand of a government. Now, we hope that's changed, and we pray for the people of Lebanon. We have a new president, a new prime minister, the LAF, the Lebanese Armed Forces, working with the CENTCOM of the United States and Israel, have actually rooted out a lot of arms caches. Will this continue? We'll see. We don't know. But this question of Hamas saying, well, we don't have to be in charge is new, but by saying they're not going to give up their weapons, are they going to be able to impose whatever on this new government? And here's also the Achilles heel of Israel. I feel like this Israeli government cannot say what it favors, that it can't say who are you going to give the baton to? I mean, Israel doesn't want to occupy Gaza. Look how many reserved days are, you know, people who I'm sure are watching this, who have friends, they have family, some of them 150, even 200 days a year. You know, if you're now in charge of the municipal services at Beit Lahia or in Sajai or Khan Yunis, I mean, you could have 300 days of reserve duty. I mean, Israel doesn't want to occupy. I think if you ask the defense establishment quietly, they will say it's got to evolve to the PA. The PA is not up for prime time, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. There's corruption issues. They're having a hard time, although they finally went into the Jenin refugee camp. So I'm not saying they're ready for prime time, no, but I think something that would point to a direction that would give the Arabs some sort of cover. Now, and the other question is, how much reform is the PA going to do? And here, I think for your listeners, this is a fascinating point because this is newer. The Arabs are aware that by just saying, like, we want to stay the hell away from this is not going to make the problem go away. And so you get someone like the Emiratis, they're willing to put real money in as long as they think that the leadership, if you had someone like Salam Fayyad, who's now at Princeton, but he had real results as prime minister, proven track record, built schools, built hospitals, built clinics, built roads, built, you know, everything. I think, you know, people say, okay, we'll invest in that, but don't ask me to invest in something if the money is going down a sinkhole. So I think having a day after plan would be helpful, and I think that the Emirates is an example of a country that's willing to help, but it's not going to be easy.
So let's go a little deeper on the Arab side. Kind of who's driving it? Um, is it the Emiratis, although they're relatively small? And where does this fit into the discussion about the big deal? which is normalization with Saudi
Yeah,
Arabia.
no, you're right to put your finger on the normalization piece. I'll come back to the first part. I think the normalization issue, and I hate to be a skunk at a garden party because I've been very much for the normalization thing. I really thought it was hopeful. I thought it was even politically easier when the Democrats were in charge because out of deference to Biden, many would vote for it, where I didn't know for sure because of the politics with Trump, they would vote Republican, and they haven't liked the Saudis back to big oil for some of them. But and Lindsey Graham, I think, did a lot of good work on during the Biden period in trying to make the case as an ardent Republican why a Democrat could do it. But I think October the 7th, and this might have been, Sunwar's calculus. It might have been, it might have been a catalyst for when he did it. I'm not saying he's built the tunnels years ago. So, I mean, it couldn't have been the reason, the rationale, but it might have been something that was catalytic in speeding it up. Look, I think for them, if you would have peace with the Saudis, it's like the end of the Arab state war with Israel. The Sunni war would be over from 1948, because if the Saudis, the most powerful state, does it, again, I'm going back to sports. It's like this is the Super Bowl. This is the World Series, the World Cup, all rolled together. They would bring other Gulf states. They would bring maybe Indonesia, maybe even Malaysia, and some of the Muslim non-Arab states. So I think Hamas thought we could be a footnote because this could be a freight train. Excuse my mixing of metaphors here. And the Saudis, I think, were driven more by the need for a U.S.-Saudi defense pact. Their view is, look, we don't have NATO. And when, if Russia attacks Germany, the U.S. goes to war for Germany. But if Iran attacks Saudi Arabia, who's there to defend us? Like what happened with Aramco in this big oil facility in 2019. I get all the Gulf officials always referring to that Aramco incident, saying, if the U.S. isn't going to stand up for when a top U.S. oil asset is being attacked, then they're not going to stand up for us. So they became, we need a defense treaty. It's got to be anchored in law, like Japan has it. But that was 1960, the last one, and America's changed since 1960 to get that. And I think what happened was the Biden people said, well, what about if there was a sweetener, Israel? In other words, you made peace with Israel. And this is a new generation of Saudis, and they don't have the hangups of their parents. And their view is, heck, why not? Yeah, why not? I mean, Israel, if oil is going to phase out, we need someone to digitize and diversify our economy. The U.S. might be pivoting to Asia. The Israelis can't pivot away from the Mideast because they live there. So in the Mideast. So I think they were open. I think that October 7th, the visuals and the Arab satellite television, not just Jazeera, even though I think they're poisonous and an arm of the Hamas propaganda machine, but all the Arab satellites were showing these. And then I think the Saudis pulled back and said, listen, we cannot do this deal politically. And I heard this from people close to MBS, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's the decider. And he said, we need something on the Palestinian issue. And this government can't do it. And I think, Dennis Ross and I wrote a piece recently in Foreign Affairs before the BB visit saying, is there a way to weave together the three elements of strategy, Hamas, and certainly, and, the Gaza piece, the Iran piece, and the Saudi piece. My conclusion now is that issue is going to have to wait till 2026. I think it's off the table. I really think there's a chance, Jeffrey, that the fight is resumed because we're at this impasse over, on the hostages. I think I worry it's going to rip Israel apart. You've got maybe 24 people alive in these tunnels, maybe another 34 bodies, and the Israeli public wants these people out. But Netanyahu, for purposes of political calculus, but no less strategic conviction, he truly believes if Hamas is there with their weapons, that nobody else is really going to be able to impose they might not have a business card that says prime minister, but they're going to be running it. So I don't know. I just don't think the Saudi and the Gaza thing go together. If there's fighting, no way. And the other big piece of this year of 2025, and you always want to be humble because there could always be, back to baseball, curveballs, sliders, changeups, you can't predict exactly. But I do think if there's going to be an attack on Iran, this is the year. I think Iran is a country, like if this was a hockey team, they have no goalie now. The net is wide open. Once the S-300 air defenses were knocked out by Israel, Russian air defenses, a lot of them, I think, from Iraqi airspace, I don't even think the Israeli planes went over into Iran. They have standoff rockets. And I think they're wide open. And Dennis Ross and I both were in Israel at different times talking to people who are not so sure maybe an attack is a good idea. And they all think if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in 2025. So, you don't want to say for sure. I do think Trump might see an advantage of a good cop, bad cop thing here with Netanyahu to say, okay, you talk about an attack, plan B. I could be the high road guy saying, well, I'll use sanctions, but I want to get a deal. I'm a deal maker. And I could see Putin now saying, okay, you're helping me with Zelensky on Ukraine. Maybe I could help you on Iran. But will he really help him on Iran? Or is Putin just helping the Iranians gain time to play out the clock until they have some air defenses, until a move at the Security Council is something called snapback, which enables a restoration of sanctions unilaterally by the US. It's allowed until October to be reinstated. So I'm concerned that we have a certain window here, and whether it's plan A with a diplomatic deal, as Trump I think would prefer, or plan B as Netanyahu would prefer, skeptical that the Iranians would really roll back their program. I think this could be a very consequential year.
Let's talk about Egypt. Important, geographically, obviously adjacent. What is the game they're playing? On the one hand, it's obvious that Hamas got a lot of their weapons through the tunnels across the border. The situation in Sinai seems to be deteriorating somewhat. Do you have a perspective on what the play is from Cairo?
Look, Cairo, I think it's a little, I would add another layer to what you're saying to make it even more, upsetting, I would say, is that they opened up something called the Salah ad-Din Gate that got very little play in the United States, right next to the Rafah crossing point between Egypt and Gaza. And that was supposedly for goods, but it was really a way I feel, for certain officials at a lower level who are maybe paid $20 a month, to take a lot of bribes, and a lot of stuff went through. So it is true that Sisi really plugged up most of the tunnels in 2015, and it's true that there are these families in Rafah. They've been smugglers for generations. But I felt it wasn't all underground. I feel it was, and while things don't stick to Sisi personally, we can't imagine that the Salah ad-Din Gate could operate without some top cover on the military side. There's allegations that are out there. I want to be very cautious that if I can't prove them, they swirl around his son, but on the corruption issues, but I don't know that. So I don't, it might be others in the military, but too many things got through that Salah ad-Din Gate. And Israel, because it was so convinced that Sisi hated the Muslim Brotherhood, which he does, and things don't stick to him, but there are a lot of people out in Egypt besides Sisi. So I think that was a problem. I think for the most part, they have, it's been a little bit, there's a phrase in Hebrew, kabdeu v'chashtehu, which means respect somebody but suspect somebody. Like, it's a duality, and I think that's Egypt is somewhat seen as a partner on the intel, and because they hate Hamas on certain levels, but they have to deal with it as well. And so I don't think it's 100% there. I think you're right to raise it.
So David, I'll be asking David questions for a few more minutes, and then we welcome questions from you, the audience. Please start submitting them via the Q&A function. We've already gotten a lot. We'll try to get to as many as possible. David, let me ask you about the Palestinian view of the day after.
Yeah.
Is there from Gaza or from the West Bank or from both, is there a credible Palestinian view of the day after, which does not include Hamas either in the front row or pulling the strings?
Look, I think the PA, they hate Hamas too. I mean, they tried to kill Abbas at one point, and the guy who really cut their budget was the PA, cut Hamas's budget. I mean, there's not a good cop, bad cop thing, I think, with them. I think there's a genuine gap, but they don't want to seem publicly that they are doing Israel's bidding. So they never really say publicly what they will always say privately, how much they hate them and how much they're the bigger threat than Israel is in many ways. But to me, it doesn't matter what they whisper to somebody like me. It's irrelevant. What matters is what they do say publicly. So, so Abbas, he doesn't want to be seen as a quote collaborator with Israel, but until you publicly call out October the 7th, you can imagine why the Israeli public is not exactly going to be cheering you on. So you could say terrorism 100 times privately. It has no meaning. What matters is what you say publicly. So what Abbas, says he wants to go back, etc. But then you wonder, and the Arabs say, well, we will only go back if we have a PA invitation. We're not going in, at the bidding of Israel. And so while they might also be contemptuous of Abbas, they're very careful to be seen as, not doing anything against his wishes. Look, if you say to me, give me a scenario, David, that's halfway realistic. I would say something, let's call it the GRA, the Gaza Reconstruction Authority. If it would be led by someone like Fayyad, who's willing to go back, has a proven track record as a reformer. The Emiratis are willing to fund him. Others are too. And I think it would look a little bit, and what I'm going to say to you is not going to sound to you inspiring, but I will say it because I believe it. It'll look a bit like Area B or Area A in the West Bank, which is a hybrid. Ironically, the PA is the most flexible partner for Israel because Israel's in and out, because what Israel cherishes above all is freedom of movement. That if there's a threat, and October 7th has reinforced this, you don't let threats gather. You deal with it. If the PA can deal with it, great. But if they don't, you're the line of last defense. You've got to go in. I think it's going to be more complex with the Arabs. The Arabs don't want to be seen as doing Israel's dirty work. And Israel doesn't want to, have a firefight with Egypt, but I don't see the Egyptians having a firefight with Hamas. Now, you could say, they won't go, the Egyptians wouldn't go in unless there's pre-game understandings. Yes, but what about if they discover some manufacturing of weapons, and Egypt doesn't want to get its hands dirty with that? Are they willing to let the Israelis go in and out when they have to? Is there going to be a deconfliction mechanism with the Arab states? I think the Arab states realize this is like quicksand, and people want their money, especially the Gulf, the Saudis and the Emirati money. But I think they'd rather do this from an arm's distance, like give guidance, advice, all that. So I don't know. I tend to think that if it's not going to be the PA, I worry that either Israel is stuck or Hamas is going to try to persevere. I feel if you want to, I guess if I had to summarize it in a sentence, Jeffrey, I would say, if you want to defeat Hamas, you have to compete with Hamas. You can't beat something with nothing. If it's just like Mogadishu on the Mediterranean, people will go to Hamas. And so I tend, and I don't think the idea that the Israeli public wants to stay there too long. So could it, if, yet I think fighting is still in the short term, the biggest, is, I think, is the most probable. I hope I'm wrong, but I want to know, tell me the plan of how the fighting is going to get me something that the other approach didn't get me since October 7th. But yeah, I want to be clear. Hamas has been degraded. They are not an army. They're a militia. They're a terror group, an insurgency. They're the only army in history that puts on uniforms during a ceasefire and takes them off during the fighting. I mean, they have all these ceremonies when they release the hostages, but as soon as the fighting stops, they take off the army because they hide behind civilians. And I've had a senior U.S. military commander from CENTCOM, the U.S. military command, said, look, we fought in Iraq and Raqqa and Mosul. We never saw anything like this. The amount of tunneling, the amount of the military hiding behind the civilians. We could move civilians out of harm's way to Turkey, to Lebanon, to Jordan. This is the only conflict where they're not allowed to leave Gaza because Egypt won't take them. I mean, Israel won't either, Jordan won't either. But so I think this is part of the problem, is that this conflict is a certain double standard. I'm sorry to say.
David, I'll have one more question, then we'll go to questions from the audience. My last question is on the Israeli plan for day after.
Yeah.
Does Netanyahu really have nothing, or is this a three-dimensional chess game where he has a plan that hasn't been revealed?
Look, they've done some work with the Emiratis, and the Emiratis are the only ones that I know of in the Arab world that is still working closely with the prime minister's office. But they too have their requirements. They want to see, someone like Fayyad or someone who they could trust is the money's not going for corruption. They want to know certain things, and they want him to have authority. They want him to be empowered. They would like him to be the empowered prime minister of the whole PA, West Bank and Gaza. So is that going to happen? I don't know. I think that is something people should think about. Because Abbas is in what is that we say that, like the 20th year of a 5-year term kind of thing. So I'm really concerned that there is no plan. I think, look, Netanyahu, he had a million reasons if he wanted to get rid of the PA. He doesn't want to get rid of the PA. He sees that I feel they do security cooperation with Israel. Yes, Israel does a lot, but without it, the burden on Israel is much greater. I think what's happened, though, is he's under the gun because Smotrich holds the balance of power, the finance minister. This is a huge month we're in now, is March of 2025, because under Israeli law, if you don't have a budget by March 31st, the end of the first quarter of the fiscal year, your government by law collapses. So I think he definitely doesn't want to anger Smotrich this month. And Smotrich said, look, if you get out of Gaza, I'm out of here. I'm bringing down the whole temple over this thing. And so I think his own strategic convictions about working with the PA are up against the hard math of the government. Now, the defense establishment, the IDF, the Shin Bet, they clearly want to work with the PA. They feel Israel is too dangerous of a region to have luxuries to say, oh, I want to do this ideology, I want to do that ideology. No, this is the roughest neighborhood in the world, and you're going to have to navigate it carefully. So their view is work with the PA, work with whoever they can. There's a new chief of staff who I should disclose was at my institute, Eyal Zamir, and he was, he's an institutionalist, and people say, oh, he's He's Bibi's guy. He's not Bibi's guy. He's a soldier's soldier, but he's not for huge swings for Israel. I think his view is we gotta be careful. We gotta navigate carefully. He did say yesterday that 2025 is a year of war, and it could be with Gaza and it could be with Iran. And I thought that was an important signal that there could be some difficult days ahead. And this is rough because, like I said, if the hostages don't get out, I mean, I just have a pit in my stomach that we're at this fork in the road. We try to avoid the fork in the road. We got 33 people out. Of those, 25 are alive. There's still maybe 58 or so there. Of that, maybe 24 are alive. So I'm worried if we go back to the fighting, what happens to these people? They rot in a tunnel. On the other hand, Netanyahu's view is, yeah, but do we let Hamas stay in charge? They have their guns, they'll decide, whatever they call the prime minister. So whether it's a Hamas prime minister or not, they'll be the ones in charge. So we're at a fork in the road, and I worry about massive demonstrations in Israel that the people say, I don't want to go to reserve duty. I want no phase. I don't want any more fighting. I want to get the hostages out. I think if Bibi could extend phase one, he would do it. No question he would do it, which is every Saturday, a few more. We'll do some prison releases. By the way, that's a risk too, because a lot of these people killed. And Sinwar emerged from that last release of Shalit of 1,027 for one corporal. And he was a mastermind of October 7th. So it's a huge risk for Israel. But to leave Gaza, I think it's a blend for Netanyahu. It goes against the grain of his strategic conviction, but it goes against the political calculus for this government to survive at this key month before the Passover recess, which goes on Israel for 6 weeks, I should add. So this is a big month we're in.
David, going to the question from the audience, I've got a bunch of questions which all point in the same direction, which is, will the hostages get out, and does President Trump's threats make it more likely, or does he face the risk of loss of credibility if they don't get out
Right.
and they call his bluff?
Right. No, I think I think you're putting your finger on a big question. That's why I'm worried about when the rhetoric is seen as just bravado. I mean, right now the Arabs don't want to be on his bad side. That's great. That's fantastic asset. The people think you're unpredictable and they want to be in your good graces. That's a good thing. But if over 6 months you keep going maximalist and nothing happens, then they discount what you say. And that's not good for America. It's not good for the credibility of our leader. So I don't know. I tend to think what's changed, Jeffrey, is the analytical shift is that when Bibi came to the Oval Office last month, he feared that Trump would force him to do phase two, to get out of Gaza, to get the remainder of the hostages. What he left with was an open check, essentially. Do whatever you want. And that should worry Hamas, but they also believe their only card to play is the hostages. So, to say extend phase one, hostages for prisoners, but no release, that's telling Hamas, Israel's not leaving. And I just don't know if they're going to, how long they're going to agree. I mean, we're just hearing every day new official denunciations. No way are we doing it. We'll see. I don't know does Witkoff, the envoy, have a rabbit out of his sleeve. There's something called the Witkoff plan, but the only people who've announced the Witkoff plan are the Israelis. So it makes me think it was Ron Dermer's plan, that he talked to Witkoff about. They called it Witkoff, but the only one announcing it is Israel, which is extend phase one, prisoners for hostages, and release half of them now, and the other half, now is the start of Ramadan, so start this now and continue it by the end of Pesach, Passover, in mid-April, and you've got more quiet, and you've got half of the hostages out, the remaining hostages, but Hamas has rejected it. Now, what Israel would love is that, and what Trump would love, is that the Qataris and the Egyptians would come down like a ton of bricks. But right now, I asked this one Egyptian senior official, said to me, look, David, the problem is people think we have such influence. The people holding the hostages are in a tunnel in Gaza. We are not in that tunnel, and we cannot force them. So we of course we want them out. Do you think we like this? We got a lot of fish to fry with America, but it's not our call. So, I mean, I think the leverage people are hoping for is that the Arab states feel the consequences would be so great for them that they would somehow do something they haven't done. But I don't see that they are doing that at this time.
David, another question from the audience basically asked, can Hamas ever be neutralized until Iran is effectively neutralized?
It's a question. It's a fair question. It's like they're not a proxy in a classic sense, like Hezbollah is, that everything comes from the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and from the Ayatollah. Hamas has always had more autonomy. They like the Iranian money, but they don't want strings in the same way. Now, often money and strings come together. So, but Hamas has been able to maneuver more. But clearly, if Iran was defeated militarily, it would certainly hurt Hamas, and so it would hurt hurt the whole proxy network. So I don't know. I tend to think this is a big year. Um, uh, I'm not sure the fighting in Gaza is something I'm not recommending it right now. I think it's, but I'm just trying to look as an analyst, whatever I want. I see where Netanyahu's coming from. It's that mix of the conviction and the calculus. But I think the bigger move this year is going to be if they really take on the nuclear thing. And I think, if Plan A doesn't happen, and I find it hard to believe Plan A will happen when the Iranian, Trump wants to get a better deal than Obama. It's unclear that the president ever read the JCPOA of Obama, but leave that aside. He wants to be able to tell people, I got a better deal. So people will say, what's a better deal? They'll say, look, it's going to take a long time to negotiate. So I'm dubious that you're going to get Plan A, but I think having the Israelis as the club in the closet in the wings is not bad. And, now the fact that Putin is suddenly coming forward and saying, here, you're helping me on Ukraine, I'm going to help you on Iran, but is he really helping the US? Or is he helping the Iranians buy time until they can reconstitute their air defenses like in the next couple of years? So I don't know, but I think there's a real shot that militarily Israel's going to hit. I think it's going to need the United States. Clearly, whether it's the Fordo Mountain, the Natanz Mountain, these are burrowed, these programs deep in the mountain. And Israel doesn't have the bombs for this. They need something called the massive ordnance penetrator. These are not bunker busters, but mountain busters. But to carry the MOPs, you need the B-2 bomber. I think there's only 18 of them in the world. A plane that's heavy enough. So will they allow Israelis to be trained in America on that? I do understand that Israel has the runways in the Nevatim Air Force Base. It's public information near Dimona. But I don't see how Israel can hit Iran without consultation with the U.S., without the material. You got to think of also the day after that. Like there might be 40 sites to hit. Does Israel hit all? What happens to the Gulf oil fields? Who's going to protect them? Because Iran could go after Israel's best friend in the Emirates. So, I mean, there's a lot of pieces that have to come into play. Could it start with a good cop, bad cop? One says diplomacy / sanctions, the other says military. Does B make A more likely? Maybe. Or is it better to frame it and say, well, try A so you could tell the world you tried, and then you have plan B as a backup. But I think there's no shortcuts of the US and Israel working together, even if the Israelis are the pilots and even if the Israelis are taking the lead.
David, we could talk for a long time, but time for only one more question, which is from our audience. Is there a significant minority in Gaza that blames Hamas for the war and actually hates Hamas, or does Hamas still have the heart of almost all Gazans?
Look, it's hard to know because we don't have good polling data. So I always want to be humble. When we don't have the good polling data, I talked to Khalil Shikaki about this, and I see him as the premier pollster. He said there are people that blame both. He said, don't expect anyone's going to love Israel, but there are people that blame Hamas, but they don't want to give press conferences, but they feel that they brought ruin. Gaza, how many rounds have we had? 2008, 9, 2012, 2014, and when I was working in the office of the Secretary of State, 2021, now 2024, and there were many things between those things. and it's just Gaza's in ruins. So I hope the takeaway is that we anything with Hamas is just a non-starter. We'll have to see, but we're going to try to do what we can do, and I feel very honored. I have great colleagues at the Washington Institute. We try to put out analytical pieces. I hope people go online at washingtoninstitute.org or go to my Twitter at David Makovsky. And I try to post things on the war or articles that people might want to see. And we just can't give up. It's just too important. And I just feel it's a consequential year. It could be a very turbulent year. So to go from sports to airlines, I would put the tray tables in the upright positions. I would fasten the seat belts. It could be bumpy this year.
David Makovsky, the Ziegler Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute. Thank you so much again for joining us. It's really been a pleasure to talk.
Always delighted to be with you, Jeffrey. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to you, the audience, for joining us for another Wizen Center for Open Learning program. We hope that you'll go to our website, www.aju.edu, often to see our many exciting upcoming programs. And we're also grateful for your continued support. You can see in the chat function ways that you can continue to express your support for these efforts. On behalf of David and myself, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and wish all of us a better future. Thanks so much.